I'm in.
On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's Opera Box Score. I'm your host, George Cederquist, joined on America's talk radio show about opera by Oliver Camacho, Matt Cummings, Weston Williams, and Ashlee Hardgrave. All right, this week, the OBS Hall of Fame is back, but this time it's the Hall of Shame. Weston and Matt induct a singer who's one of the greatest of all time. But can a neutered goat still be called a goat? But first, with the Chiefs and Bucks set to collide in Super Bowl 55 in Tampa, we tackle the big game through opera glasses and offer a few betting tips, plus 2-minute drill. As proof that the OBS bump really works, friends of the show Brenda Ray and Anthony Roth Costanzo have won this year's Beverly Hills Artist Award. Great to be doing yet another OBS with a fantastic team. Oliver Camacho, how goes it?
Oh, great. Thanks.
And
I'm just checking in, just saying hi.
Weston, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine.
Great. I love your lighting. That ring light is
you.
really paying dividends. Matt Cummings,
Thanks, Dallas Opera.
how are you, sir?
Doing great, getting cozy.
Excellent. And Ashlee Hardgrave.
I'm doing great because for all of the most recent shows, I have come on with Lady Firsts in sports, and I can do it again this week. Sarah Goodrum has been hired as the minor league hitting coordinator for the Milwaukee Brewers. She is the first woman to have that role in any Major League Baseball organization. Congratulations, Sarah Goodrum.
Man.
The downside of sports this week, my Red Wings are losing, and COVID is now tearing through the NHL. I feel like I need to swap out this jersey and get like the away colors, which is red with a white logo. Maybe that was going to turn thing around for the Wings. Let's talk some opera.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
Super Bowl 55. Really? 55?
Something that's older than me.
By
It's
this much.
This Sunday, with the Kansas City Chiefs going for back-to-back titles, this time against Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I want to get the OBS team and all of you out there in Operaland ready for the game. So here's our advice on how opera fans can enjoy this weekend's gridiron action. Weston, let me go to you first. All right, there's two givens in every Super Bowl. A, it's about spectacle, and B, it has a totally predictable ending. The underdog never wins. So give me an opera that seems to fall into the category and meet those two checkpoints.
Well, if we're being honest, the predictable ending and all about spectacle is really just the entirety of 19th century Italian opera.
Take it back.
I mean, I'm just thinking about like lots of like middle early Verdi, like plot contrivances, even like, you know, like Rossini, you have a lot of these like commedia dell'arte derived archetypes in all of his comedies. And, you know, there's no melodrama like the Super Bowl or an opera by Donizetti. So for me, opera and sports are kind of heightened art forms, and realism is rarely really the point. We don't really care about what Tom Brady does in real life. We only, and in the case of Ashlee, we don't care about Tom Brady at all. But similarly, in 19th century Italian opera, it's always about the singers or the players, if you want to extend the metaphor a little bit. The plot Il Trovatore may make no sense and might end exactly how you think it would if you know anything about the conventions of Italian melodrama. But it doesn't matter as long as whoever's singing Azucena is just studying that vampa, as we say in the football biz.
That's actually the correct Italian conjugation, too.
So
So good with languages.
nothing truly surprising is going to happen in a Super Bowl or the Barber Seville, but there's enough variety for each performance that you can so that seeing that game, feeling what the singers are feeling and what the football players are footballing, what you see how that performance plays out, even though the outcome is pretty basic, can be really, really exciting or incredibly dull, whether your favorite team wins or not.
We've definitely had...
Can I dovetail on that just sentiment? Every 17th and 18th century opera seria plot can be described as something has upset the hierarchy or the order, and order is restored.
That's every single one.
And most of them were written by the same person. So.
It's true.
And all of
we'll
them
come back
street
to
ace,
that later.
All of them street ace some sort of vampa. That's going to be my new phrase for
They
everything.
all street a that vampa.
So that's what's happening on the field then. But obviously the Super Bowl, of course, people watch it just for the ads alone. They're a big part of what that Super Bowl culture is. Matt, what opera singers, or singer maybe, do you want to see advertising what product?
So normally when I think of opera advertising, I do think of those giant glossy Rolex ads that you find in every single program of any show
every
that you
time.
ever go to. But we don't need those this year because time is meaningless. So take that, Rolex. So instead, what they should all do is put that money toward a big old glamorous mask PSA. Hi, get all the top singers. Ooh. Get Renee. Get Juan Diego Flores. Bring back Leontine Price and Grace Bumbry. Do it for them. Bring on Sandra Radvanovsky and Jamie Barton. The more the merrier. Some young up-and-comers. Ben Bernheim would be great. Pretty Yende. Just keep Placido Domingo and Ana Netrebko as far away from this as possible.
No thanks. No thanks. No.
We will see. This is a great prediction, actually. We will see how many masks are worn or advertised during the course of the Super Bowl. All right, Matt Cummings with the ads. So another part of the spectacle off of the field, of course, is the halftime show. Let's do a super quick micro pop quiz here. Which singer sang in the halftime show of Super Bowl #1?
Oh, gosh. I have no idea, George.
No idea.
Okay, well, we're going to give you a hint. This is a famous musical theater woman.
Super Bowl 1?
And if you're doing the math, Super Bowl 55 is 2021.
54 years ago.
I have no idea, George. Please just tell me.
She was also famous for Hello, Dolly.
Hello.
Are you talking about Carol Channing?
Carol?
How
Was
times
it really?
have changed that Carol Channing sang the halftime show at Super Bowl.
That's amazing.
I'm so glad to be here for some football.
Old jazz baby Carol Channing. Yes, baby.
Oh,
so
treasure.
I've been thinking about who I would like to see direct the halftime show because it's sort of on the level of the Olympics, the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. You need big,
True.
broad strokes. You're on a huge stage. And I would love to see not just like, I don't know, Coldplay or somebody like doing the halftime show. I really want some theatricality and some big gestures. So can you imagine like Robert Wilson directing the halftime show?
I physically, like, not a joke, like, tingle all the way down my spine as you said that. Like,
those poor
amazing.
singers who would have to just pose and hold those poses
In
for
profile.
hours.
Like
they
this.
just performed the entirety of Einstein on the Beach for the halftime show.
That's the thing is like the halftime show would be about 3 times as long as the game.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
It's perfect.
I would also love it if Yuval Sharon, American director, artistic director at Michigan Opera Theater, I would love to have his agent provocateur style applied to the halftime show, right? So like everyone's got their headphones on and they're listening to their own, recording or there's
Agreed.
like just cars driving
that the crowd
around everywhere.
doesn't get to hear.
That's exactly right. I will say the one person who I think is a great director and definitely not the person to direct the halftime show would be the Spanish director Calixto Bieto. He's a huge director in Europe, but typically his work involves nude women being mutilated. Definitely not something for a halftime show.
I mean, they gave, who was it who had the
Janet
wardrobe
Jackson.
malfunction? Janet Jackson.
Who
I mean,
was
if they didn't
it?
allow
Come on,
Janet
Weston.
Jackson do it, I don't think they're going to let Bieto do that.
So after the game, the Super Bowl MVP gets interviewed, gets a trophy, and typically says, I'm going to Disneyland. But Ashlee, where in the opera world should this year's MVP Tom Brady go?
Nope. First of all, it's not going to be Tom Brady over my dead body. Listen, if you're going to do this, you go big or you go home. So the MVP is going to say, I'm going to La Scala in 2022 because that's going to be the next time that it's safe to travel internationally. P.S. Go Chiefs.
We're going to wrap up our Super Bowl preview here with some predictions for the final score to help you out with your betting, your over-unders, and your parlays and your spreads. Oliver, what's your final score?
I'm really invested in the fact that Super Bowl Sunday is also the first day of the Australian Open because of the time difference. So I'll be watching that, guys.
No bets for Oliver.
Weston Williams, what's your Super Bowl prediction?
Well, if you guys want to put down any money, I'm perfectly willing. I am pretty confident. I've looked at all the stats, all the numbers, and I'd be willing to bet a fair amount of money that at least one football will be thrown or kicked.
Matt Cummings, give us that Super Bowl prediction.
I just want Tom Brady to lose.
Oh, wow.
Here.
He's a Republican too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
He's worn a red hat more than once.
It's like a MAGA guy. Yeah.
Ashlee, give us your Super Bowl final score.
Kansas City 34, Tampa Bay 20.
Ooh.
And my own prediction is going to be Indianapolis Colts 29, Chicago Bears 17.
I'll take that bet, George.
Why am I the only one who gave an actual prediction?
No, that
Ashlee
tracks.
is a professional.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, this is OBS Hall of Famer, our enthusiastic yet humble salute to a distinguished opera artist who has gone above and beyond to contribute greatly, distinctively, and with grand significance to the art and honor of opera.
So for today's Hall of Fame segment, we have something a little special for you all. Up until now, the Hall of Fame has focused on singers of the 20th century or 21st century. But the thing is, opera goes far beyond the history of the 20th century. But the problem has always been that without recordings, a lot of singers tend to sort of fade away. You might have heard them once or twice while you're doing your thesis research or whatever, but you don't really know a lot about what they actually sounded like. You have to really rely on history, musicology. And to me, there's something really fascinating about the transient nature of a lot of old opera practices and singers and performers. Sometimes you read descriptions of them, you just wish you could go back in time and hear them, but you can't. And because of that, most artists don't really, that have sung opera, most of them to date, will never really know anything about. It's very sad because, recordings didn't really start until the turn of the last century. But there are a few singers, including the person we're talking about today, who somehow managed to remain in the public consciousness despite a lack of recordings, despite, the onward march of time. And with that in mind, today we're going to be talking about the great castrato Farinelli. Even though he died in 1782, he has not faded into obscurity in the same way that even singers from like the 1930s have. So today we're going to try to determine why his cultural impact was so important and what made him so special as a performer.
So give us the 30-second bio for Farinelli and tell us which pasta shape he was named after.
Well, I'm going to need more than 30 seconds just for his birth name, because Farinelli was just his stage name. And his pasta name or birth name is Carlo Maria Michelangelo Nicola Broschi. He was born in 1705 to a musical family, a fairly well-off family. He was a very talented boy soprano, but because he was from a well-off family, there was no expectation that he would become a castrato. But after his father died, there was some financial complications, and he was thrown off a horse, which meant that he had to, which was the justification for having the operation, so to speak, to become a castrato. Now, if you don't know what castrati are, just a kind of a little overview here. In the early days of opera,
I'm just going to turn off my video while Weston describes this.
I will not put in any pictures, so you don't have to worry about that. But composers wanted to produce music that covered a large range of pitches and timbres. However, if you go back into like the Middle Ages, even the early Renaissance to a certain extent, you had a lot of restrictions on women who could perform. So if you wanted someone to sing in what is just typically considered a woman's range, you would often take a very talented boy soprano in the local church choir, do some snipping, and then they would no longer go through puberty in the same way.
And it's worth mentioning that was really true mostly in churches and cathedral choirs.
Exactly.
This was kind of in the pre-opera world.
Yes, there was a little bit of it happening really early on, but even by the 1680s, I think it was no longer the case. But it should be pointed out too that even though it would give them the range that we would more typically associate with women, there are other qualities to the voice of a castrato, reportedly, that are not the same. There are genuinely things that happen to your body physiologically when you go through a castration operation that allow you to sing in very unusual ways. First of all, you stop producing testosterone. Your larynx doesn't change, so you can still sing quite high. But you do keep growing. And as a result, you have a larger rib cage. The bones, particularly the joints, don't grow as they're supposed to. So you'll get a much larger rib cavity, which will affect the size of your organs, but will also give you a huge amount of air to work with, which gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of range that was really otherworldly, because this is not a kind of sound you could get naturally just growing up. And because of that, it was a very prized vocal type, even well beyond the point where it was technically legal in most places. That being said, it was eventually made illegal. By the 19th century, it was pretty much illegal. But so as a result, there's not a lot of direct knowledge of what castrati sounded like. But I would like to play one clip really quick. This is from the only known recording session with a castrato. And we should point out that he was used to a very old-fashioned style of singing. It's very sort of sobby. There's like a sob in every note. There's some interesting pitch distinctions that may have been on purpose. It might have been because he was past his prime. We're not entirely sure. And of course, it was recorded in 1904. So we don't exactly know about like the audio quality. But I hope that this little clip of Moreschi singing a little bit of Ave Maria.
His name is Alessandro Moreschi.
Oh, Alessandro Moreschi, excuse me. Singing a little bit will give you a sense of what that kind of voice might have sounded like.
All right, so Weston has given us the background of testosterone and prepubescence, also known as Weston in freshman year.
That was me!
Of college. Matt, tell us about singing style and the ability that's required here.
So, like, what's interesting about that clip is that it's both, that we just listened to of Alessandro Moreschi, is both that it's an old singer past his prime and really, really antiquated recording technology before its prime. So, like, on both kind of polls, we're not getting a good idea of what a castrato sounded like. We just only enough to know that it sounded different. It sounded novel. And when there are a number of really kind of commonly referred to accounts of musicians and composers who got the chance to hear castrati and particularly Farinelli perform in these operas in London. And a number of those descriptions have kind of been passed down. So one from Johann Quantz, who was a flutist and a composer, notes that his intonation was pure, his trill beautiful, his breath control extraordinary, and his throat very agile, so that he performed the widest intervals quickly and with the greatest ease and certainty. Passage work and all kinds of melismas were of no difficulty to him. In the invitation of free ornamentation in adagio, he was very fertile. So that's a whole lot of words that don't really necessarily mean anything if you're not familiar with how people talk about
I did get
technique.
the fertile pun, though. That was pretty good.
Yeah. Gotta wink. Gotta leave a wink in there.
A little bit.
So all of this is talking about his ability to use his voice beyond just the tone itself. And so one thing that's drawn to is the difference between flexibility and agility. And castrati had to do both of those things. Flexibility has to do with how easily can you change the way your voice is singing in a given moment. And that can be things like dynamics, whether you're singing loud or soft, articulation, whether you're singing staccato and detached, or legato and really linked together, and breath control to kind of tie all those things together and change them on a dime. That is in contrast to agility, which means singing a lot of notes very fast. And these castrati had to do both of those things. They had to do them both in the arias themselves, and these arias were written in a certain way so that it was material A, and then material B, and then material A would come back for a da capo. And sometimes those could be fast, sometimes they could be slow, but regardless, in that da capo section, you were expected to ornament. You were expected to come up with things that showed off the voice, showed off you as a singer. But it's actually more than that, because the music at this time was very, very strict in its rules. It had a whole set of rules, and then it had a whole set of rules about which rules you could break and when you could break them. And in order to ornament, these singers had to know those rules cold. And they had to know their music cold, because you couldn't break any of the rules. And people knew the rules, and they were listening to it. So these singers, these young boys, would study 9-10 hours a day to be able to master this work. They spent 1 hour a day practicing just trilling between two notes.
That's my nightmare. It's my nightmare.
This kind of a schedule, like when we talk about them as singers, they really weren't just singers. They had to basically have all the abilities of a composer in order to make a career as a singer.
Because literally, they studied music theory, counterpoint. Farinelli himself actually he composed himself a little bit, and he wrote down a lot of his own ornamentations in certain places, which are very treasured sort of objects now. And just like looking at some of the descriptions of what these days of training were like was very physical, and it was also mentally incredibly taxing.
And the other thing physically taxing that you'll really get about these arias, if you listen to any of them, is just how long the phrases are. Because of the physiology of being a castrato, and Farinelli in particular, even among his peers, just had the ability to sing for like a minute at a time without breathing. 542 notes in that time period. And he would do all kinds of fancy things like crescendoing up and decrescendoing to a huge volume and then make it as tiny as possible, and just they could execute everything. And so in order to hear what kind of music was being written to execute on, we put together a little Spotify playlist of a number of these arias. And the last thing that I would add here is just that as talented of a musician as Farinelli was, he also did become this kind of international star because he had really great connections. His teacher,
it's all about who you know.
His teacher was Niccolo Porpora, who was one of the leading voice teachers at the time, and is still remembered today as being one of Farinelli's teacher. But Farinelli became Farinelli because he studied with Porpora.
Yeah, and he had his debut with a Porpora piece when he was only 15 years old, which is still bonkers to me.
And a lot of the music that he recorded was either written by his teacher or by his brother, who knew they both knew his voice really well and would highlight things that he could do specifically, his strengths and really what his special calling cards. But one other one that can kind of get overlooked here is that he was really good friends with Pietro Metastasio, who is the librettist of Baroque opera. He wrote almost all of them.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah. Very, very talented.
There's a really beautiful portrait. Maybe we'll show that right now. The portrait of Farinelli and Metastasio. Enjoy.
Oh, wow. That's a great portrait, Oliver. I love that you put that in. Thank you for making me edit that in later after the fact. But I absolutely it really was, he really was a force of nature as a talent, but he was also one of those people who really was able to find himself in situations where he could really use his talent to his advantage to get to know people who could give him other opportunities, who could further his career. And you know, like he knew emperors, he knew kings, he knew queens. He had the height of his public career was in London with the Opera of Nobility, which was sort of a rival company to Handel. And he single-handedly saved its finances for a few years, by the way. And that despite his massive salary, which was about £1,500 per season, which is quite a lot in the 1730s, which added up to about £5,000 once you include gifts from all of his admirers, to give you some sense of the kind of people he was palling around with.
And there were many admirers.
And there were many, many admirers. But here's the thing. Usually when we're talking about the story of opera singers in the 20th century or the 21st century, it's a lot of grind. They have a big break and they spend the rest of their careers singing in front of the adoring public. Farinelli actually went a step beyond that, because in this time period, of course, you have lots of kings and royalty still at play here. So after London, in the 1730s, Farinelli went to the court of the Spanish king, Philip V, and never sang in public again, which is kind of earth-shattering to me that he had such a relatively short career where people actually heard him who weren't the king, but we still know who he is. And the reason he got called to the court of King Philip V was very interesting, because the king was very ill. He was probably he probably had depression, as we would now think of it as, and his doctors thought that music might literally be the best medicine for him. So he sang for the king. Almost on a nightly basis, became the official chamber musician. He organized and performed concerts for the royal family and organized a theater there. He was even knighted in 1750, and he became officially a noble, which is kind of amazing from, you know, because this is always the gamble that was being made, right? Farinelli is like the American dream story nowadays. Basically, if you were a young boy who could sing in a exactly, because there's back in most people who became castrati came from poor families. There was no hope for social climbing, but the success of people like Farinelli, who were able to propel their voice literally into the court of a king, was very alluring for poor families. However, after Philip V died, there was some drama in the court, and he got caught up in it. Ferdinand VI succeeded King Philip, and he loved music, and he wanted to keep Farinelli on, even though Philip V was dead. However, Philip V's widow, Queen Elisabetta Farnese, did not like the fact that Ferdinand was in power. She moved away into her own separate palace, was very nasty, talked to diplomats without him, kind of as if she was really the queen, said very nasty things, and she wanted Farinelli to come with her, and he said, no, I'd prefer to stay here, and she never forgave him for that. And because of this, when her son became the queen after Ferdinand died, her son was Charles III of Spain, it meant that he was out. Also, Charles III hated music, which didn't help either. And so he went essentially into retirement at a fairly young age. Again, he hadn't been in public since early 1730s. And he just kind of retired to Bologna, and he lived there until his death in 1782. He outlived many of his contemporaries. He collected pianos, art, violins. He was apparently very generous, but was kind of out of the public eye, but people still kept coming. Luminaries, nobility, composers like Mozart and Gluck came to sort of meet him and just kind of get a sense of who he was. He was often called the greatest castrato singer of all time, even though there was only a very narrow window to actually hear him. And it's just such a bittersweet ending to his story, I think, that he just kind of ended up retiring out of the public eye and just has this legend behind him that lives on to this day. And in fact, his story inspired a lot of pieces of art going forward.
Yeah, and there's that play that came out a couple years ago about Farinelli and the King. There's also the movie, the biopic of him, where if you've heard of him, that's probably where.
Wasn't Weston Davies in the play?
Yep.
Of Farinelli?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
friend of the show.
And what the movie did to get around the fact that there are obviously no castrati anymore is that they kind of they mixed together the voice of a countertenor, Derek Lee Reagan, with a mezzo-soprano whose name I can't remember right now.
Actually, she was a coloratura.
It's
wasn't
Eva
she?
Marie Waleska or something
it was some
like
Polish
that.
soprano. I can look it up.
Just to have all kind. Yeah, she was a soprano. You're right, but that in it, there's more to his legacy in these tribute albums that come out every once in a while, and a big component of the Farinelli tribute album is what does it mean to do one of those? And you're kind of saying something really specific about yourself if you are doing a Farinelli album, because breath control and phrasing are the hallmarks that have stood the test of time. That's what people know from the writing. That's what you're going to be judged on. And so the thing that you're going to do to emulate it is to show that you can do all kinds of crazy pants runs and hold notes forever and go up and go down and do leaps and make really bold, wild phrasing choices. And that's why the singers who have done these albums are people like Cecilia Bartoli, Vivica Jeannot, Anne Hallenberg, Philippe Jarouski. These are superhuman techniques who have something to say about kind of themselves and their place in singer history as well. Singers like Bartoli and Vivica Jeannot in particular, they got their start doing Rossini, which, as Weston alluded to earlier in this show, Italian opera is not the most respected field of the genre in order to be taken seriously as a musician. And so to switch over and release this album of crazy pants Baroque music shows that you're a different kind of singer. You're willing to put in a different amount of work. It makes a statement about you as an artist. And that's why we're going to keep seeing them. And the excerpts that come from them can be really high quality.
And I believe you've included those on the Spotify playlist.
They are also included
video viewers
in the Spotify playlist.
By the way, her name was Eva Malas Godlewska.
Amazing.
Yes.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you, Oliver.
But I think that it's not just these tribute albums. I do also want to point out that Farinelli has had books written about him, various novels, a couple of operas, even some comic operas back in the day. There's a Lampa, I believe, in 1744, in his lifetime, was writing about him, an opera about him. he shows up in Candide of all places, Candide by Voltaire, the Voltaire. And to me, that's just such a great example of how even in a transient art form, there are ways of achieving a sort of immortality, even beyond the point where anyone will know what you actually sounded like. And there's something hopeful, a little bit sad, and very exciting about that all in one. And to me, that's Farinelli. I
take it back. I want a Farinelli impersonator for next year's Super Bowl halftime show.
Just really quickly, because there's one thing that you didn't touch on that's sort of part of the titillating story of the castrati and Farinelli.
We were leaving that to you.
Well, there's that they were, people sexually fetishized them.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they had very unusual bodies. They were sometimes androgynous, but still very masculine,
usually very tall, just
Yeah.
because of how body chemistry works.
And it should be pointed out that like they still had all the business down there. Often
they had the wiener with no beans.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well,
Frank
actually,
no beans,
sometimes they actually did even include the beans. They just severed it more subtly.
Okay.
It depended on how good the doctor was in the time period.
But they had both male and female suitors,
Yes.
and they were good for not getting you pregnant.
This is true. You're quite right. But I think it did lead to a lot of, I think, really kind of what would become modern ideas about gender and sexuality and things like this. And even past the point where castrati were being written for, pants rolls are still very much a thing in opera. And I think a lot of that inquisition into gender and challenging the binary in opera comes from these castrati, this long tradition of castrati. And I think without that, we would have a much less interesting art form to talk about and experience.
And let's also just say that just because you were castrated did not mean you were going to become a great singer. Many of these families were gambling on their children's health, and many of them lost that gamble. So to become a star like Farinelli did, and the other, famous castrati of the time, they were really, really lucky.
Thank you, Weston and Matt, for the deep dive into the lifetimes and music of Farinelli. Again, music is on the Spotify playlist, and we will link to that via our website, operaboxscore.com. It's time for the 2-minute drill.
This just in, the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Friends of the show, Anthony Roth Costanzo and Brenda Ray, have been named 2 of the co-winners of the Metropolitan Opera's 2021 Beverly Sills Artists Award. They join future friends of the show, bass Ryan Speedo Green, tenor Ben Bliss, and soprano Erin Morley. Meant to help subsidize training and study that will further artists' careers, the 5 Sills Artist Award co-winners will each receive a prize of $10,000.
English National Opera is using singing techniques to help patients who are experiencing post-COVID-19 recovery symptoms. ENO Breathe is a joint project between the opera company and the NHS. Patients are taught breathing and singing exercises by professionals, which help combat breathing issues that can linger after recovering from the virus.
The premiere of a new opera by Lebanese composer Zad Multaka has drawn criticism for having an all-white cast of singers in brown face makeup and hijabs to portray fictional characters. While not going as far as to call the production of L'Orangerie overtly racist, critic Natasha Gauthier writes for Opera Canada that the production is, quote, shockingly insensitive and regressive. At a time when we are celebrating how far we have come, it's also a reminder of how far we have to go.
In better news from our neighbors to the north, Tapestry Opera announces Jolaine Galland and Jennifer Tung as their inaugural Women in Musical Leadership Fellows. Those 2 will be mentored by conductors Rosemary Thompson from the Okanagan Symphony and Opera Kelowna, and Joanne Falletta from the Buffalo Philharmonic.
The Opéra Nationale de Lorraine has announced the historic appointment of Marta Gardolinska as its next music director. She will be the first woman to take on the position in the company's history and is also the first Polish music director for the organization.
I'm in. The San Diego Opera has announced Opera Hack 2.0, an event that combines the expertise of the theater world and cutting-edge technology in order to, quote, virtually gather, brainstorm, and discover new methods for theatrical production and performance. The online event comes with $15,000 in prizes for winning ideas.
International online voice competition Boris Martinović was named by Boris Martinović, who was world-famous American and Croatian opera singer. Their mission was to connect talented singers with artists, managers, and agents to provide them career development, auditions, and job opportunities to connect voice students with universities all around the world. They were and are very much satisfied with the number of people, contestants, and audience. However, someone has a major problem with that. Zach Finkelstein, tenor, accused for false accusations against international voice competition Boris Martinović and their organizers.
All right, this week's yellow cards.
Russia. St. Petersburg's Mariinsky Theater is scheduled to perform Eugene Onegin on February 10th with Anna Netrebko.
Florida. Per the Orlando Sentinel, Orlando Opera Orlando's Hansel and Gretel was performed and will go ahead with their next production, Death of Ivan Ilyich, on February 19th.
This week's red cards.
And by the way, that's 2 yellows for Opera Orlando, so that's basically a red. Austria, the Wiener Staatsoper is postponing its live stream of Notte di Figaro and Carmen due to infections among the performance teams.
Belgium. La Monnaie in Brussels announced that it will remain closed throughout February.
Finland. The Finnish National Opera and Ballet has suspended performances until March.
Oregon. Portland Opera is postponing its production of Frida and canceling its Il Trovatore.
Spain. Valencia's Palau de las Arts will postpone their fall staff until March and Verdi Requiem until July.
Exit stage right. Eva Kutaz, who oversaw Harmonia Mundi's A&R for nearly 30 years, has died at the age of 77. Working with her husband, Bernard Kutaz, who founded the music label in 1958, Eva created an artistic roster that earned her immense respect and admiration, and she produced more than 800 recordings for the label.
American conductor and pianist Kevin McCutcheon died from COVID-19 in Berlin at the age of 66. He was a conductor at the Opera Company of Philadelphia before he made his conducting debut at the Deutsche Oper Berlin in 1985, where he went on to shape the sound of the company for 3.5 decades.
And on this day, February 1st, in 1859, Irish-born American operetta composer Victor Herbert was born. In 1872, it was the birth of English contralto Clara Butt, the first singer to premiere Elgar Sea Pictures. In 1874, it was the birth of a favorite Strauss opera librettist, Hugo von Hofmannsthal. In 1890, Germaine Lubin, soprano, was born in Paris. In 1891, Alexander Kipnis, the Russian-American bass, was born. In 1893, it was the debut of Puccini's Manon Lescaut in Turin. In 1896, another Puccini opera premiered. This time, it was La Bohème, with Arturo Toscanini conducting. In 1904, Enrico Caruso earned $4,000 singing his first music for Victor Records. In 1918, Franz Lehar's operetta Wo die Lerche singt premiered in Budapest. In 1922, it was the birth of the great Italian soprano Renata Tebaldi. In 1931, for Weston, Arnold Schoenberg's opera Von heute auf morgen premiered in Frankfurt. In 1936, it was the birth of the bass baritone and early music specialist Max von Egmont. In 1939, it was the first performance of Wolf Ferrari's La Dama Boba in Milan. In 1946, Carol Neblett was born in Modesto, California. And in 1949, RCA Victor Records released its first small 7-inch plastic recording with a big hole in the center. The newfangled disc style played at 45 rotations per minute and wiped out the 78 RPM counterparts within 6 months.
And that's your 2-minute drill. All right, Ashlee, take a breath and tell us your hot take on English National Opera's Breathe program.
I think this is so great. I'm so excited. So when it comes to recovery from COVID-19, it affects everybody differently. But one of the things that's really starting to come out is something that's called long COVID, which basically are these long, lingering respiratory issues that are weeks and weeks, sometimes months, sometimes half a year after you have quote unquote recovered from the virus. So the fact that professional singers are teaching people proper breathing techniques to help get them actually breathing again, to help reduce their stress and anxiety, and also helping them feel useful and part of the solution in the process. I think this is just amazing. I like that it started out small. It's going to be at 25 different centers across the UK. Hopefully they can put it more places. Let's do it over here in the States. But I think it's a really cool way to see the technical of the artistry work together with the technical of the healthcare field.
Yeah, who wants Britain back in the European Union now, huh?
Most of Britain, I imagine, at this
I'm like,
point.
I do.
And it seems like most of Scotland, too, maybe, at this point. Not that I'm an
spicy.
expert in British politics.
Matt, take a breath and tell us about brownface in Canada and your hot take.
I mean, if I had gone to see the sneak peek of this opera production, I would have had to take many deep breaths. So this was a sneak peek of a new opera by a Lebanese composer for the Montreal contemporary opera producer Chant Libre, or Free Songs. The composer is Lebanese. It's set in the Middle East, but none of the singers were from that area. And it is 2021. I don't even know what else to say.
And Canada's usually really good about those things.
Canada
too.
is usually good about this. They at
so
least think
weird.
about it before.
Well,
ahead of
clearly
time.
not in this case.
Just
Like, even if you can't find any singers of color, I feel like once you bring out the face paint, you got to start questioning something. Am I right?
and
You know?
this review makes it sound like it wasn't even. I mean, it wasn't even well done. Brown face is like quite a complaint, but. What are you doing?
That's a contradiction in terms, I think.
It's true.
Yeah.
There.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
somebody needs their brown-faced head examined on this one. It makes absolutely no sense. Here's what I don't understand, Oliver, about the Beverly Sills Award is that so each of these singers gets $10,000, but these are all folks, at least in my opinion, whose careers are completely established. They've already reached.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, like, I think it's
They've,
just at
most
this
of
point,
them have already been on opera box score and everything.
George, you might be
Yeah.
onto something about the way the opera world works.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, they had $50,000 to spend, and they divided it up amongst 5 singers. So I love all of them. Why
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just name them the winners of whatever the Beverly Sills Arts Award and give $50,000 to somebody like Michelle Bradley or something? You know,
It's nothing about these singers. It's nothing about their talent level. It's about money that could be spent elsewhere. And I mean, this could be given to 5 up-and-coming singers, one from each of the 5 boroughs of New York City, just to come up with an idea.
And the fact of the matter is, when you get to that level, even when you do get to that level of career, like, it's hard work, and you do deserve to get paid for your work and for your recognition. But when you're talking about study grants and trying to help establishing artists get a foothold, that's not what they're doing here at the Beverly Sills
I
Award.
mean, the Met has all its weird awards anyway. I mean, Opera News is basically an arm of the Met. You know, they have their annual Opera News Awards, and like
a
people
spicy
like
take from Oliver.
yeah,
And the Richard
people like
Tucker,
Joseph Kalea
yeah.
get inducted into the Opera News Awards. You know, whatever.
The
I don't
Newsies.
want- yeah, the Newsies. When there are, really important singers who've had long careers at the Met who have not been acknowledged by that particular honorific at this point. So it's all a bunch of hoo-ha, but I do like the idea of bigging up Ben Bliss and Aaron Morley and Ryan Speedo Green, because they are all great, and our friends Brenda Ray and Anthony Wealth Costanzo. I think none of people know Brenda Ray, so I'm glad that she's getting her props. And Ben Bliss is a rising Mozartian tenor, very great on stage. We all know Anthony Wealth Costanzo. He's doing fine. He doesn't need the $10,000. I'm sure he can make $10,000 busking, But let's say everybody needs $10,000 right now. I mean, so many people are out of work, so mixed feelings.
somebody who may or may not need the money. So, Weston, who is this guy, Zach Filkenstein?
It's a good question. So if you're wondering if Oliver was having a seizure during the 2-minute drill, that's because he was there.
I was reading from an interview, which can be found in the very respectable online
Diane Martinovich.
Yeah.
Life and Business Online magazine.
Yes. So if you recall from last week, there was a little bit of a scandal that Middle Class Artist broke with our friend of the show, Zach Finkelstein, who found this competition, this voice competition, was posting pictures of artists and bios of singers who had never heard of the competition and who were not involved. In what seems to be, allegedly, we should say allegedly so the legal team of lawyers doesn't get me.
The international team of lawyers.
International team of lawyers doesn't get me. Allegedly, in an attempt to sort of essentially trick singers into giving them money, thinking the contest is more high profile than was thought. So there was a post by a Zaharian Johnson entitled Zach Finkelstein tenor accused for false accusations against international voice competition Boris Martinovich and the organizers with an exclamation point, which basically doxes our good friend Zach Finkelstein while still spelling his name wrong in many different ways.
7 different iterations of his last name.
Weston, this is good tabloid journalism. What's the problem?
Okay,
to be clear, it was 7
different spellings.
It was 7
different
misspellings.
Yeah, I think it was 26 times that his name was used in the article and misspelled 7 different ways. So, but let me just say, just to summarize really quickly, Zach Finkelstein saw this irregularity on this competition and made it clear to the singing community that this is probably a scam, or these people have not been asked to use their materials to help this online contest, international online contest, because they're asking $90 per contestant. So Zach Finkelstein published his article, Middle Class Artist, and it exploded. And, the contest organizers were very upset that they were being called out. And so they had their phony website called DM Life and Business, which had nothing on it except for the competition publicity. And suddenly this website now all has I think 3 articles at this point that are all about the competition, plus some articles that were clearly ripped off and plagiarized from the internet. Plus, we talked about it last week, advertisements for the contest organizers, life coaching and the Korean orphans and stuff like that. So it seems to be completely a scam that's created by this one person, Diana Martinovich, the wife of international bass baritone. And and they keep digging themselves in a bigger and bigger hole with so many lies, and there's so much evidence that she's putting out there herself that's just implicating her as being the behind all of this scam. So
like she's accusing Zach of being part of a conspiracy,
a U.S. conspiracy.
Well, they have information that indicates that some people outside the U.S. were involved in this conspiracy too. To take a direct quote,
hence the international team of lawyers.
Yes, the international team of lawyers, and it's the. I mean, I don't want to shame anyone's grammar for being in a second language, but they're just like the sheer unhinged just volume of
run-on sentences, badly punctuated, badly spelled,
is really kind of extraordinary.
You have to check it out, folks. It's dmmagazine.org. Just go to that website and just sniff around. Just click on the links, and hopefully you won't get a virus.
Don't enter your social security number anywhere.
Opera Box Score is not responsible for whatever computer worms you might get off of this site.
If everything on your computer turns into a GeoCities site after you visit it, I'm really sorry.
It's really extraordinary.
It's bonkers to me that, what Zach did was report on stuff that did in fact happen. Yes. A singer a singer, her headshot was used and she did not give permission because she did not apply to the competition. Zach writes an article that says, hey, this singer didn't apply to this competition and her stuff's on the website. And then chaos ensues for, what are we on, day 8, 9, somewhere in here? And there's a full, dox campaign on our poor buddy Zach, who was just telling the truth.
And this is really blowing up in the singer community too. So if you have any friends who are singers or a singer yourself, just do some digging around on Facebook. You will find comments on comments on comments. It's very entertaining.
Singer community also knows how to beat a dead horse.
It really is sort of the singer equivalent to what happened with the GameStop last
basically,
week.
Yeah.
It is.
I have a really bad feeling that we're going to be talking about this again on a future show. Let's wrap this one up.
Good call. Bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. We're going to start with Oliver Camacho. What do you have for us? You got a good call or a bad call this week, Oliver?
Well, many of you know who follow tennis that the start of the Australian Open was delayed, COVID related. And actually, that's good news for Serena Williams because that extra couple of weeks to prepare is allowing her to compete. She had an Achilles injury. And this is her chance, again, to beat the record for most Grand Slams.
Matt Cummings.
Start your countdowns now, people, because in 2 weeks on PBS, there's going to be a new documentary, Voice of Freedom, about our bae, Marian Anderson, hosted by our other bae, Renee Elise Goldsberry. I will be watching this many, many times.
Bays on bays.
Weston, you've done a lot of talking tonight, so we're going to let you rest those vocal cords. Ashlee Hardgrave.
And while we're waiting for that Marian Anderson doc to come out, I'm not one to promote Lifetime television. However, there is a movie coming out this week it's a Mahalia Jackson biopic, and it stars Danielle Brooks, who is from Orange is the New Black, as Mahalia Jackson. That comes out on February 3rd. I'm very excited about it.
And for myself, I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't want to watch a lot of movies, but I have started watching Ted Lasso on Apple TV. It is a sports-driven sitcom, and I'm absolutely adoring it. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer is Norm Woodel. Visit Norm at normwoodel.com. On Facebook, search for Opera Box Score. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at Opera Box Score. Help us deepen the bench of listeners by liking and sharing our social media posts. Email us at operaboxscore@gmail.com. Subscribe to the podcast on Stitcher or favorite our show on Apple Podcasts. The views and opinions expressed on Opera Box Score are solely those of the show's creative team. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of the accounts of this show without the express written consent of Opera Box Score is totes not cool. Nah, it's actually cool. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For your co-hosts, Matt Cummings and Ashlee Hardgrave, I'm George Cederquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you watch for the ads. We're back with an all-new show next week when we send and receive Opera Valentines. Even Weston's going to get one. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more trophies. Join us!